So welcome teachers and MESA staff to Designing for Equity Industry panel. How do I do this? Just a couple of housekeeping rules. If you can please turn off your microphone. Your cameras are allowed to stay on if you would like to. We are recording this session. And if you do have any questions, we ask you to enter them in the chat box, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end as well too. At that time, you can unmute your microphone as well. So we have two lovely young ladies. Our first panel is Priscilla Newin. As she mentioned, she's born and raised in Houston, Texas. She's multiracial. She's Mexican, Vietnamese American, and a daughter of immigrant. She received her bachelor's in architectural engineering from the University of Austin and has a master's in structural engineering at Stanford University in Palo Alto. She currently works as a designer engineer with Degenkolb Engineers. She's been working there for 4.5 years, and she's worked on projects for tenant improvement projects to design all gender restrooms on the seismic upgrade of hospitals that serve low-income residents to ensure that hospitals can remain in operation, and so marginalized groups don't lose access to healthcare. She's currently president of the SHIP San Francisco Bay Professional Chapter and is a co-chair of CN, I might pronounce this wrong, CEONX?
CEONC?
CEONC.
Yeah.
CE Third Racial Equity Task Group in California. And in her spare time, enjoys reading, watching movies, and running and connecting. Sorry, let me move this out of the way. Oh, sorry. And connecting with family and friends. So Priscilla, thank you so much for joining us. And then we have Laura Valencia Fritzitz. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that.
Close enough, it's French.
Laura is a graduate from CSU Fresno. She got her master's degree in electrical engineering. She's a huge STEM advocate and an active supporter of the SHIP mission to empower Hispanic community and to realize its full potential. She's an electrical engineer at Eaton's e-mobility division. She's working on developing the next generation of power distribution and protection for electric vehicles. Is a STEM advocate and a SHIP Oregon Vice President of Communications. She hopes to inspire the sense of familia to all the members by keeping everyone connected and know the latest event of information. In her free time, Laura enjoys having difficult conversations with issues that matter, and she likes active and connecting to nature. She likes staying active and connected to nature and participating in activities such as swimming, running, and snowboarding. Thank you, ladies, so much for joining us. We do have a few questions. Carlos, did you want to ask the first question?
I'm nervous. It feels like trivia.
You're muted, Carlos.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I should put the Jeopardy music on. Yeah. Well, rest is all right, Alex Rebecca. But yes. So these are each are worth 10 points. I know. Just I think these questions we just want to just get your feedback about how you see these things, this idea of design for equity, this concept of universal design, and their ideas that are can be packaged in different ways, but the idea is that you want to create products, create things that appeal to help people that are marginalized or help people that are disadvantaged, that are focused on creating equity. So thinking about those types of concepts of design for equity or universal design, how does your company define those types of concepts and that type of motivation to design for equity and to for, universal design? So I know Laura wants to start.
I can start. So I think one of the most important things would be voice of the customer. One of the things that I learned very early on is that voice of the customer is extremely important. So whenever you are going to be designing a new product, the first step is to collect voice of the customer. And the way that we do that is by it's by going to the people and asking, or like going to the customer, whoever, whatever your industry is, everyone has different customers, and asking, what are your pain points? What are you struggling with? What would be a good way? Well, you don't want to ask them the solution. You mostly just want to ask them what they're struggling with, what they wish would be different. And then they'll usually tell you like, oh, I wish like this worked like this, or this was like this, or like I really struggle with this. And then so you record that information. And for our company, that is truly the first step, to collect the voice of the customer, to talk to multiple customers. And then after that, you start seeing patterns of like what is really needed. Because in a hypothetical situation, you can think of like a really amazing product, but it's really not functional for everybody around. So then the way that you narrow that down is by talking to multiple sets of people and asking like, okay, what are the pain points? What are the issues? What are you trying to solve? And then you convert that in our process, we convert that into CTQ, which is a critical to quality, um, uh, specification, I guess you can say. And then we rate those. We say, okay, which one's the most important? And then we go back to the people who gave us the original feedback, and we say like, you know, from a scale from 1 to 10, how important would you rate this? And that's how we essentially narrow down like what is important to the customer, and how we take different people's input before we even start designing anything at all. I don't want to go too long into that, because I can probably continue talking about the design process. So I want to give Priscilla an opportunity to give her idea.
Yeah, that was interesting how you said that you go in without the solution yet. You go to really find the voice of people and what they really need and what their real struggles are. So Priscilla, the same question about those principles of designing for equity and where you work.
Yeah, I would say that isn't very like clearly defined. It's more like implied. And like Laura said, a lot of it it's led and directed by the client. So our clients are typically the architects. So architects are the ones that win the project, and we usually are the sub-consultants. So we work for the architect. And it's really like their mission that's getting driven. And in a way, we do get to decide which types of projects we pursue. So in most cases, I would say we strive for equity in that way, that we seek out projects related to healthcare, higher education, and community-based projects. So like, creating community centers for like different cities or different counties. And I think, I guess for architecture, I think most people typically think, oh, like, making sure that buildings are ADA compliant, right? Like, oh, are there ramps, for folks that have to use wheelchairs or not? And, making sure there's like enough parking spaces for them as well. For structures, I think as a structural engineer, it's like, I think it's mostly, pursuing those types of projects. And like, in a way, I wasn't really thinking about equity when I worked on the projects that y'all mentioned in my bio. It was more of a retrospect. Like in retrospect, I was like, oh wow, like I'm really happy that I got to get my hands dirty in those projects. Like looking at the one hospital in Daly City, like I didn't realize the impact that it would have had if we didn't retrofit that building. Like, like thousands of locals would have lost access to healthcare, like, having to maybe drive or like take public transit very far away just to have access to medical care. And also like the all gender restrooms, like that was something more of a like in retrospect, that was like, wow, that is going to make an impact, especially for folks that are going perhaps transitioning. And because you read in the news about people that are like assaulted, or they're victims of violent crimes because of their gender identities. And it's like, it makes me happy to think like, oh, now they have a safe space to relieve themselves or whatever. um but I would say, yeah, it's very much client driven, and you can see that now. Like now we're seeing that our clients are really looking for firms that, really value diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they're really like not gonna choose, even like it doesn't matter like how um much prestige you have, like if you're not putting those values up front, that you're not going to get that project. So I think we're re-strategizing, making sure by creating, like we also created diversity, equity, and inclusion council to look at that, to see like, well, what we can do, what can we say to our clients to show them that we do value diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're actually starting a diversity and inclusion group, but also making sure that um, that we when we say that we value those, that we show with actions, not designing prisons, or designing not designing like high real estate or whatever projects that might displace marginalized communities, so things like that.
I like the what you said about that you have a choice of the projects that you take, and that you're actually putting that diversity lens in making those decisions and making those choices, and making your contributions to a more equitable cities, more equitable society, really, in what you're doing. That's fantastic. That's great. B.
So we really emphasize a lot of the engineering design process that the students really use the engineering design process when they're coming up with their competition. What methods or research do you guys use once you found your client, to understand the end user's needs, the user's needs? What methods do you guys use in your company?
Um, I guess that would be going back to what I was saying earlier. So once we identify, so I guess for the design process, um, it's essentially engineering is solving problems, right? So the reason we build anything at all is because we're trying to whether it is making a building like Priscilla was mentioning, or like with me, like I work more in product based, like I work on a part that it goes into a car. You really need to understand the system, right? And so that's why from the beginning it's really important to have like um, a very clear idea of what you're trying to go do, because before you can even start planning about like what the specifications are going to be, you really need to understand the system and how that system's going to affect people and how people are going to use that system and how that fits into the ecosystem of all things being designed. So going back to what I was saying earlier, collecting the voice of the customer, then getting your CTQs, getting your critical to quality specifications, and then going back to the customer and asking the customer, okay, this is what we think are the most critical things that the product needs to have. Do you agree, yes or no? And then once you have those ranked and you say like, okay, these specifications are critical to the success of the project, then after that, you go into a brainstorming process where you come up with multiple ideas. So not just one. Because there's more than one solution to any one problem, and everybody has a different brain, so everybody can think of a different solution. So then you maybe have for us, we do a lot of DFSS training, which is Design for Six Sigma. And when you do Design for Six Sigma and getting the voice of the customer, getting the CTQs, and then doing a Q matrix would be the steps to get into what is ultimately the thing that you're going to design. So once you come up with like maybe 2 or 3 different ideas of what can be a potential solution, then you again go back to the customer and say like, okay, now that you told me what are the most important specifications and the ranking of importance, this is the 3 or 4 things that we think can be a potential solution to your problem. And then they choose, right? They choose. We can say, for my case, we can say, okay, if power consumption is really important to you, this specific product will give you the lowest power consumption. If fast charging is important to you, then this is the product that will give you the fast charging. If how much voltage or current or whatever, like whatever is most important to you, safety, if safety is the most important thing to you, or like the size or the space, it could be very many different things. Sometimes it's cost. Sometimes you can only, sometimes the customer says, we can only afford, like this piece of equipment can only cost this much money. So then all of those things you take into consideration, and then you go through the Pew matrix, which is how you balance out, like, okay, this is option 1, option 2, option 3, and then you grade them against your CTQs, your critical to quality characteristics, and then you choose the one. Essentially, the customer chooses which one they're going to go with, and then we begin the design process from there. And then that's when that's how we convert the engineering, the voice of the customer, into actual engineering specifications, which is what we learn in college, the math, right? So we turn that into math, and we give that values. We can make that into tangible, a tangible thing. And then you get multiple people working on it. You get a team together. You get a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer. You get a manufacturing engineer, a marketing person. You build a team, and then you go from there. And then you start with that first prototype, and then test it out, see if it meets or it doesn't meet the specification. Yeah, so that's my answer.
For me, I mean, structural design is very much driven by the client. So it's like client decides what performance objective they want to meet. So for example, like office buildings, um, they're not essential buildings, so they don't have to be designed for the worst case scenario. But hospitals, on the other hand, are considered essential facilities, and they do have to be designed for a higher degree of care. And so for those, those kind of forces, the earthquake forces, especially in the West Coast, California, those are really governing the design of the structure. And so we look to the building codes, like, what are the minimum design requirements? But that, I guess, in that, when you look at that, it's not really driven by equity. So that's mostly like, just making sure that the building won't collapse. And so that's, I guess, it's more of an equal standing, like making sure, like, you're reducing, or you're like minimizing the risk of human life, like that you're going to lose people if a building collapses, or you're just trying to reduce that risk of a building collapsing. um, and so the process is just going through the code and making sure you're meeting all the different specifications there. And there's also a review process where you have to get reviewed by so OSHPD is the jurisdiction or authority having jurisdiction that governs the design of hospitals. And then there's also like the DSA that governs the construction of higher education facilities, and also like K through 12 community colleges and so forth. But I guess, and for that part, like, it's not really for me as a structural engineer to decide, like, oh yeah, well, we have to design it for this. It's really client driven, and how, like, it also is like cost driven, like, what is the budget and what performance category they want to fall under. But as I mentioned earlier, like, what we can do to make sure that we are designing for equity is to, really have some sort of commitments, like I mentioned earlier, like, not designing detention centers or prisons, or not working on projects that are like, higher end residential that might displace marginalized folks. So those types of things. And I think right now the construction industry is looking at labels. I'm pretty sure most of y'all have heard of LEED. So that's mostly a sustainability label for the building, but now they're looking at like equity labels for companies, for firms, for design firms. And so we as structural engineers are like a little bit behind from the architects. So the architects already have that label in place. But I think the structural engineers and civil engineers are looking, okay, how do we create that kind of label for design firms? in the industry to, to show our clients that, like I mentioned earlier, we do value diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, and it has to do with like, what commitments are you making? Are you making sure that there is a pathway for underrepresented groups to, work at your firm, and also like, the types of projects that you pursue? I'm not sure if that answers your question, or like if you need more clarification.
I think you're giving us pretty good information about the sensitive, because we understand. I think something that's good to understand too is that different industries are going to have different perspectives on these issues. But I think the one of the things that I know in Mesa we want to do is to create more empathetic, more sympathetic engineers, um, so that when they go into these different industries, they bring that empathy for others and that equity lens. And it looks like to me that even in the different industries that both of you represent, that's something that's needed, and that's something that will help the work that's being done. Um, so yeah, our students are the focus of what we do in MESA, and one of the things that and this competition, this NEDC competition, Design for Equity competition, students they form their groups, and they do this work in groups. But one of the things that they learn right away is that yeah, they're working in the group, um, but there isn't they need a lot of help. It's not, they're not gonna be able to do it completely on their own. So regarding working with others, what do you work with different teams within your organization or other organizations to achieve an equitable design product? Speak more about the partnerships that are needed to make your work possible. So that again, the idea is that, as a project group, you don't know all the answers. You can't. So what kind of what other organizations within your company or outside the company, what partnerships make your work possible?
Um, so for Eaton, we are a global company, so we operate in about 120 countries. And it's huge. We have about 120,000 employees worldwide. So our products go to many places. And so we don't make everything in one location. So as far as working with people, it's very important that you are open to working with people all over the world, and that you are able to take in their input and take that into consideration when you're going into the design process. So for example, I mentioned before, after you decide, okay, this is going to be the product that we're going to build, then you put a team together, and that team may not be local all in the United States. So in my situation, I have projects where I work with people in Prague, with people in India, with people in the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Mexico. You need to be able to work as a team. A lot of our manufacturing for the products I'm currently building, they are in Mexico. And so we need to be in communication with the manufacturing and making sure that what we're building, it's something that you can actually make. Because just because you thought of it in your head doesn't actually mean that you can build it. So then we have to work with them, and they tell us like, okay, this is a good idea, but it's actually going to be really difficult to build. And then so they give you a lot of feedback, and you iterate. There's a lot of iteration when it comes to designing products. There's a lot of iteration, and part of the iteration comes from getting the feedback from manufacturing, from marketing, from the people who are putting the product in front of people's hands. So after you have a first prototype, usually what happens is that marketing will either give it to the customer will test it out in their system, and then the customer will tell you like, yeah, this is working perfect, or like, no, actually this really needs to change. Or if you put it in front of another customer that has something to do with like the product, if you're trying to sell them based on the features of the product, then they'll tell you like, is this product intuitive? So I remember when I was working for electrical system, we were building new breakers, and I'll just give you a quick example. And we took the new breaker to a European fair, and customers were walking, and they were able to hold the breaker in their hands and like switch the switch on the breaker. And a lot of the feedback that we got was like, oh, this switch feels really like flimsy. And because a lot of the North American market, they want to have like a really stiff switch, right? Because it's like,
Mm.
oh, that if that breaker is gonna break like a huge current, we want it to be like a manly switch. But then in other markets, like, oh no, this is great. Like it doesn't hurt my hands or my thumbs, and it's like ergonomically friendly. So so there's like a lot that goes into it, right? So then you do work as a team to accomplish this final thing. And the first thing you design is not going to be like the thing that goes on the market. So I can tell you right now, I am in my sixth prototype of the product that I'm currently designing.
6 prototype. Wow.
Sixth prototype of the product, and it's finally gonna go into production. But it took 6 iterations before um, we could even say like, yeah, this is a production ready, a product that is production ready. But you had to start from like the very beginning. And I've been working on this product for 2 years now. And so it's finally gonna go into production. And
Wow.
but we're designing for products that they're not yet in the market. And so like when you think about like, how is this product being tested? How is it being used? We need to wait for the feedback. So whenever they put these prototypes have been going, so the product that I'm currently designing goes into an electric bus, and it senses the charge of the electric bus. So you can measure how fast it's charging and how much charge you have in the batteries of the electric bus. So then it had, because it's such a big bus, it runs a huge voltages, so it has to be like really safety conscious. You don't want to have a huge fault. So
No, no
so
problem.
there's like a lot of safety features that went into it. And then in testing and making sure that it was when it wasn't in the bus, and like when you're driving the bus, like that it was going to be capable of like surviving through the temperature and the heat and the vibration and um, the environment that it's going to be on. So there's a lot that goes into designing something and putting something in the market, especially when you're talking about safety products where people are going to be on
Wow.
that product, right? So if people are going to be riding on this bus, if you think of a city bus, I don't know, 30 people can ride on it or something. If you were to have a product that malfunctions, you can potentially put the lives, you can potentially put you can risk the life of 30 people, and it's because you didn't take the time to iterate and do your due diligence and testing and making sure that you had enough prototypes. So yeah, we do a lot of iteration, and we don't take it lightly as far as putting something out in the market. Um, we do have a lot of standards that we have to meet, that the product has to meet, to ensure that it meets vehicle standards, environmental standards, a lot of different protocols that it needs to meet so that it is safe to be produced.
Goodness. Yeah, you don't want to throw anyone under the bus when you're doing this. Literally.
Absolutely not.
Oh man, well, you know what? It's interesting because I think you're talking about the actual process. I think it's very useful for our teachers and students because nothing is done isolated. Yeah, projects take a lot of people and a lot of voices. It seems like, and obviously for all your permitting, you need people to actually know that process well and can
Right.
work with the different jurisdictions too. So wow, Priscilla, can you uh, weigh in on the question about partnerships and teams?
Yeah, definitely. I do work with multiple teams within my organization. So we do have offices along the West Coast, so anywhere from Seattle down to San Diego. And I had the fortune and the opportunity to work with folks in Seattle and LA. And so it's been pretty rewarding, like getting to see how those offices like work, but also like it's also about sharing knowledge. So we And my team in Oakland and San Francisco, we actually got to design a system which was like very new, very innovative, and we got to share that knowledge with the other offices. So that's really great, but also thinking about the diversity of those teams, like even like within my office, like, you know, we have to be very flexible to work with, you know, folks that range in age. So you have different generation, multiple generations within the same company. So, you know, like figuring out how we each communicate. So like older folks tend to prefer like in person and you know, phone calls, while younger people are like more about like instant messages. So it's like figuring out which one works best for everyone. And also, you know, you have folks that might be parents. So like, you know, especially during these times where we're working from home, working remotely, and some folks maybe have to do schooling, you know, educating their own children, doing homeschooling, like, you know, figuring out a good time to meet. You know, we have to be flexible with that too. And as you mentioned, we also work with outside consultants to make sure that we're giving the client a high quality building. So working not only with the architect, which is who we're working for directly, but also there are other sub consultants. So like the mechanical engineer who designs the HVAC systems, electrical engineer, also like maybe the landscape architect. So working with all of them to make sure we're coordinating and we're meeting like the project budget, project like deadline, because sometimes like, you know, some teams might not be giving you all the information till the very end, and then like you have to like redesign a lot of your things. So that can be frustrating. So it's always good to be in communication, you know, having those like either weekly meetings or whenever, like bi-weekly meetings, to make sure that everyone's coordinating and staying on top of it, on top of their stuff. Um, so that's really important. And I think, yeah, it's mostly just working with the architect. And in some instances, like the mechanical engineer will be the the clients that we're working directly with them. So sometimes there are like some disagreements where like they want to do something, but you're like, oh, this is going to be very complicated, or it's going to cost a lot. And when they see the sticker price, they're like, oh yeah, maybe we should do something more economical. So it's like really working with them and uh, just being upfront and clear and transparent. And and I think that answers your questions. I don't know if you have any other
No, it
follow-up
really
questions.
shows us how it's so you don't work in a vacuum at all in the work that you're doing, and you might have to stretch yourself because you might actually be able to you know, give your own input as to the engineers about for example, you mentioned a mechanical engineer, an opportunity even for your group to give your advice, to give your thoughts. So it's a process that it's pretty, and it sounds pretty complex, but it also kind of shows our teachers and students that this type of work is it's always done in partnership. It's always done in teams, and it's always done in groups. And it's okay if if your group doesn't know all the answers and isn't an expert in everything. You can find people. You can work with others, and that's really the important in this type of design work. So B, to the next question. I know we're how we're doing with time. 20 minutes. Okay. B, to the I know you have another question, B.
I do. I wanted to go back to the discussion of design for equity. I know when I first contacted you guys were like, "What is design for equity?" So, how does your company define designing for equity? Like, I had mentioned to you universal design, and you're like, "Oh, I kind of understand that." So, how does your company define it, or how does it? What does it mean to you?
Um, so for Eaton, I guess like the big mission statement is we make what matters work. And so I think that's one of the main things, or that's how the company essentially drives their vision, you know, making what matters work. And for them, that means, or like for us, that means, you know, like making sure that we are designing to the highest standards, making sure that we are taking into consideration, like I mentioned, voice of the customer. I guess when I was a student, one of the things I wish I would have known as a student, as far as designing, was that, for instance, I thought that I can just design something and I I'm really good at math, so I can just turn a problem or take a transfer function, turn it into a circuit. And I was like, okay, it's designed, and that's it. And then I was like, I thought it was done. And what I learned being in the industry is that that's like such a minimal part of the process, because like I didn't know anything about standards. I didn't know anything about SAE standards or UL. There's like a lot of organizations that make sure that you're designing a product that is going to be safe. And so I didn't know anything about standards, and I didn't know how they applied and how they affected your design. And I didn't know any of that. So at Eaton, what Eaton has taught me is that it's really important to design safe things for people to use. And so when they say like we design what matters work, or we make what matters work, they're always keeping in mind that no matter what you're designing, because we have so many products that we design, and we're in the electrical industry, we're in the automotive industry, we're in the aerospace industry, we're in the vehicle industry. It's a lot of industries. So no matter what you're designing or what portion of the design part you're in, you always have to keep in mind the end. You have to keep the end in mind. So you have to know, like, how is that going to affect people around you if something goes wrong? And so for us, like designing for equity would mean that we're making a safe product, and that we are doing everything that we can within our constraints to ensure that our piece of that big airplane, for example, like if we're doing the landing gear, that's not going to break, right? So if like we're making landing gear, we want to make sure that we're making the best landing gear that we can. If we are making transmissions for cars, we're making sure that we're making the best transmission that we can. For my case, I'm working on a whole new thing, or it's like electric vehicles. They haven't been around there that long, but everybody has incentives all around the world that they want to become fully electric, like in the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years. Especially Europe has huge push for like going electric. And so like ensuring that we're taking part of that we are like, no, yeah, like global warming is a thing. That we're building smart houses, that we're building power efficient things. So we're a power company, right? So Eaton makes electrical products. We ensure we do power management, and power management looks in many different ways. And so just keeping in mind that like keeping the end in mind, and making sure that you are following all of the rules, all of the checklists, that you're meeting all of the standards, that you are not skipping steps, that that you are holding yourself to a high standard and meeting the values of the values that you have for yourself and your company, because you have to put yourself in the position of the person who's going to be using your product. So like, I don't want to go into a building that is going to collapse, right? Like if there's an earthquake, for example, in California, and you don't want to go into an electric car that it might explode while you're driving it. So like, you really have to think about like how that's going to affect the people around it or the people using it. So the end user is always the main person. And so we always try to put, like you take risk by putting things in front of the customer while you're designing, but but you take, what do you call them, calculated risk, right? So we only have, for example, 6 buses and they're circulating. And as soon as there's a problem, it goes back to us into the shop, and we investigate and like reiterate and like put the bus back out there. But, so like in a way we are having some risk, but they're calculated risk, and they're like not like huge risk. But I think in the last few years, taking people's into consideration has become a bigger thing. How things are connected, like we are more digital now. We are definitely more digital. So how do products interact with other products? How do we collect data? There's a huge thing on just collecting that. So we're collecting so much data, we don't know what to do with it. So like the next step is really figuring out like how does that data we're collecting now is going to affect the products that we're going to be designing for the future. Because before, we weren't really collecting as much data as we had now. And so now we're collecting a lot more data, like how many cars pass through the street, or how many times do people actually charge their car, or how many, like we are collecting when you wear your Garmin device, like we are collecting all the data, like your heart rate, all of that. And like it hasn't driven many design changes now, but it will in the future. And so like now that we're designing smarter products, we're collecting more data, and with all of the data analytics and the big data, that is going to affect designs in the future, but it's not going to change the process of like designing those things. It's just it's going to affect maybe the voice of the customer, because now the voice of the customer has some numbers attached to it, I guess.
So Priscilla?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, we my company doesn't have like clearly defined goals, but as I mentioned, we do have some sort of like commitments that we're making to ourselves and to our clients. Personally, I think when I think of designing for equity, like I think of like the architects. So the AIA, that's the organization for architects. If you look at it, they have like, especially the SF chapter, they do have a equity by design kind of like seminar or conference where they really like look into it, like as I mentioned earlier, like making sure that when you're building, you are building inclusively, and like the types of projects that you work on, and making sure that you're really like working for the community. Personally, I also see that the civil, or even the architectural engineering and construction industry has a long way to go to build for equity. I think about, instances in my childhood, like I grew up in a low income household. We struggled to have a car. And so we really relied on public transit. And if you think about it, people, low income folks typically don't live in the city center. So they live in the outskirts of the city. And like, how do they get to work? Like, they're probably going to rely on public transit, but most likely public transit is not accessible, available in their area. So like, you have to think about it. Like, when we design public transit, it's typically for folks that, are in higher income because they don't like driving. And so, you have to think about like, okay, well, you have all this infrastructure, but is it really helping everyone, or is it just helping certain sectors of the public? So I think about that. And I also think about, when we see high rises and we see like, really nice buildings, and I think about, you know, people that are getting displaced, they have to move out. And like I mentioned earlier, they're typically moving outside of the city, and they're losing access to public transit. And I also think about, yeah, typically that, and gentrification. And so I feel like, yeah, we have a long way to go, but I think we have it in our hands to make that change, to make sure that everyone has reliable build. Like for me, especially, like I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Houston, and we were hit by hurricanes a lot. And I see that, like, typically the people that get flooded are because they're located near, in really low elevation. They don't know that they're prone to flooding. And so there needs to be more information given to residents to make sure that they know, they're aware where they live and like the flood zones. And they typically don't have money to be able to repair their homes, and they're just going to keep getting flooded because nothing is done to make sure that there is some preparation to that. And I think about that a lot. And it's like Laura mentioned, like global warming is only making things worse in terms of climate change, and we're only going to get even more stronger hurricanes. So I think about the whole Gulf Coast region. And in California, you think about earthquakes. Some folks that can afford it can retrofit their houses, but what about those that can't, or that live in like very, very poor soil? So they're gonna have to, like, their homes are not gonna survive. So I think about that, and that's what actually got me interested in architecture engineering and structural engineering, because I saw how people from New Orleans had to evacuate to Houston and be in shelters and not knowing when they can go back. And so that's why I got into engineering, because I want to make sure that I am creating safe buildings, not just for the few, not just for the rich, but for everyone. because it's typically Black and brown folks that have to bear the brunt of it, like not having a house to go back to, or not having the means to rebuild from ground zero.
Wow, that's a great message for everyone, and a great inspiration. That you can see that your work can make a difference when you see all these inequities around you, and that you're aware of those very marked inequities. Yeah, that one must have been something for folks to go all the way to Houston from New Orleans, from Louisiana, from so far, just and to be there for so long. And I mean, gosh, that was awful, the whole thing. So, but the thing is that it should motivate us to do something about it, right? And that's what we hope that we inspire in our students, that same sense of responsibility, that same sense of duty, so that in their spaces they can do something about it. So we only have a few minutes left. Are there any from the folks that are here in the room, any questions that you may have? B, do you want to just do the chat, or you just want to open up if they want to say something, or what do you think?
They can unmute, and then if they want to say something or do it on the chat, we'll be looking at the chat as well.
So yeah, so if you want to unmute and ask our wonderful panelists a question, you're open to do so, those that are with us. So
So I am curious. I mean, I have two kids that are engineers, and I asked them this question as well. And I think it's such a valuable field to enter. And I think we should pass that message on to our students. But I struggle with, how do you say in a nutshell, this is what it means to be an engineer?
So what would you
Can
say
you,
succinctly?
what was
About
the question? I didn't hear.
The question honestly is, to our students, how can we give them the elevator speech, if you know what I mean, a short speech about what does it mean to be an engineer? When you say you're an engineer, they think of someone driving a train.
Exactly, yeah. I would say the best way to sell engineering, or like the way that I talk about engineering, is if you are a person that you like solving problems and that you want to make the lives better for people, then you can be an engineer. Because engineering is so broad, like there are so many different types of engineers. Even if you're an electrical engineer like me, you may not be working on new product development like I do. So you may be working in something completely different. But if you're passionate about solving problems, and you're passionate about making things that are going to make people's life better, then you can be an engineer. And I think for me, like the reason that I am an engineer is because that was from the beginning. I wanted to work for a company. Like my main things in my head was like, I want to work for a company that works with renewable energy. I want to work for a company that is doing so. Like I had specific things that I wanted. I wanted the company to be a global company because I wanted to have a farther reach. I wanted to have a company that worked for things that mattered. That was going to make people's lives better, and I wanted to be part of that. And then also have an opportunity to say hey guys, we should really focus on this because this is important. And so Eden is a huge supporter of a ship. Like we are at the ship conference every year, and so the fact that they take it into consideration, or they go out of their way to go and hire a diverse workforce is really important to me. But as far as why I should be an engineer, or when I talk to kids all the time, it's because if you want to change people's lives, if you want to make people's lives better, and you like solving problems, you like puzzles, you know, then you can be an engineer. And that can look so many different ways. My mom thought that being an engineer meant that I was gonna work in construction. And she was like, that's for men. And I was like, no, mama, I wanna be an electrical engineer. And she's like, well, I don't understand, you know, and she didn't understand what that meant. And so a lot of even kids nowadays, they don't really understand what that means. So that's why I think exposure is so important. You know, bringing people to different internships are so important. Like Eaton will not hire anybody who doesn't have an internship under their belt. So, you know, like taking university students to see what an engineer does is so important, and to encourage them to take internships and to just try them out. It doesn't mean that that's going to be their job forever. It's just kind of like, oh, this is what actually an engineer does. And even little kids, like having like open houses at Eaton. Well, not right now in COVID, but we usually we would open like our center and like say like, this is all the products that we build, you guys, and like we'll get, you know, people from everywhere, and they're like, oh wow, like there's like tractors here, you know, and like, so it could be many different things.
So Priscilla, as the prototypical engineer in construction, can you weigh in on that question as well? What does engineering mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it means a lot. Like Laura said, it's really about like, you know, I would ask you to ask your students to reflect on their communities. Like, what are issues that they see? Like, you know, what solutions do they see? Or like, you know, just writing them down and like, you know, pointing out, okay, this is how an engineer, this type of engineer, but also like making them aware there's, like Laura said, there's different types of engineers, and you can't really just like put them in one box. It's like different boxes. And they sometimes might like overlap in some instances. So I would really encourage you to, you know, to have them look at different types of engineers, but also like writing down like the issues that they see and that they will like to resolve in the future.
Right, B, I don't see, want to see any final words, because I know we're almost pretty much out of time.
We are, yes. Ladies, I really appreciate you taking the time and being here with us and speaking to our teachers. It really does mean a lot, and it does give up the perspective of how what industry is doing for designing for equity. So we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for giving us what you guys do at your job and how equity does affect, you know, our community now, our world. So we really appreciate that.
Thank you all. Thank you for asking us to join.
No, thank you for
Thank
sharing your
you for having us.
perspectives. I know you're very busy, and we're in the middle of a Saturday, so thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And a lot of nice thank yous from our attendees, so that's wonderful.
You have the survey. Is that going to be posted?
Yes. Okay. I'm going to look for the survey right now and post it. I am going to stop the recording right now.
Great.